My name is Michael Rowan. I am 65 years old, and I have lived long enough to understand the weight of loss, the quiet ache of memory, and the small, fleeting moments that define a life. I built a successful construction company with my own hands and raised my son Daniel after my first wife, Evelyn, passed away too soon, leaving a void that no amount of success or material comfort could ever fill. That morning, the house felt unusually silent, the faint smell of salt from the nearby ocean drifting through the open windows, mixing with a rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee I had poured for myself as a quiet ritual to anchor my thoughts. The walls of the living room, lined with dark oak shelves and photos of Daniel as a boy, seemed to close in on me with nostalgia and an unspoken unease. Lily, my 8-year-old granddaughter, entered the room hesitantly, her small frame wrapped in a pastel pink cardigan, her golden hair falling in soft waves around her curious, anxious eyes. She held something in her hands, a crisp white envelope that looked too stiff and too serious to belong in the innocent grasp of a child, and there was a tension in her shoulders that immediately set my senses on high alert. I watched her pause at the doorway, her gaze flitting toward me and then toward the floor, a fleeting shadow of fear crossing her young face, and I felt a pang of recognition. This was not a normal childhood hesitation. This was caution. This was knowing something she believed she was not supposed to know. My instinct told me to approach gently, to ask softly what she had found, but another part of me, honed by decades of careful observation and experience, warned me that this envelope, this small, inconspicuous object, carried more than paper. It carried secrets. It carried the potential to unravel everything I had worked to protect. I took a slow breath, feeling the cool morning light brushing across my face, reminding me that I am alive, that I am here, that I have fought storms and recessions, cancer scares, the absence of a beloved partner, and now I was facing a different kind of test, one that would demand patience, strategy, and restraint. Lily finally whispered my name, her voice barely audible, trembling, "Grandpa, I think something's wrong." And she held the envelope closer to her chest as if shielding it from the world, from me, from herself. My heart clenched at the sight of her courage and the gravity of her secret, and I realized immediately that the calm, measured life I had attempted to maintain after Evelyn's death was about to be disrupted in ways I could not yet see. I bent down slightly, forcing my voice to remain gentle, almost conversational, though inside I was grappling with a mixture of disbelief, protective instinct, and a dawning suspicion. "Lily," I said, keeping my hands visible, my posture open, "what do you have there? You can trust me." Her eyes flicked nervously toward the staircase leading to her mother Emma's room, then back to me, and she shook her head, a quiver in her lips. I found it in Mommy's closet. But I wasn't supposed to. I don't know what it is, but please don't be mad at me. And in that instant, I felt the duality of my role, the grandfather who wants to shield his grandchild from hurt, and the father who knows instinctively that this is not just a child's mistake, that something is festering beneath the surface of what I had always trusted to be a safe home. My mind raced, connecting faint threads I had glimpsed over the past months. Emma's odd questions about our finances, her casual curiosity about the house, and the trust I had kept intact for Daniel. The way she smiled too sharply in conversations, the subtle manipulations I had nearly ignored in my desire to respect Daniel's autonomy. And now, a small 8-year-old was the messenger of a truth I had not wanted to see, a truth that I could not ignore. I reached slowly, without sudden movement, and took her hand lightly, guiding her to the couch where she perched on the edge, still clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. My chest tightened with a mixture of fear and resolve as I looked at her wide, sincere eyes and realized that the ordinary morning, the gentle rhythm of breakfast, and quiet conversation I had anticipated was over. The world one thought I understood, the quiet security of my home, was shifting in subtle but undeniable ways, and I felt the first prickling of anticipation, not for danger, but for revelation. The envelope, small and deceptively simple, held the key to a series of events I could feel forming but not yet name, and I understood, in that fragile, suspended moment, that I had a choice, to turn away, to pretend ignorance, and let the normalcy continue, or to act, carefully, deliberately, with the full force of my experience, my intellect, and my love for my family. My pulse was steadying, my breathing controlled, but inside, the gears of my mind spun rapidly, weighing loyalty, strategy, and the delicate calculus of justice. "Lily," I said softly, "whatever is in there, we will face it together. But you have to promise me something. You won't tell anyone. Not your mom, not Daniel, not even your friends. Understand?" She nodded, barely blinking, her grip on the envelope tightening, and I could see the gravity of the responsibility she felt, the courage she summoned at 8 years old. And in that moment, I swore silently to myself that whatever the secret contained, I would navigate it with patience, cunning, and a quiet, unrelenting resolve to protect the family I loved more than my own peace of mind. And so the morning, which began with sun streaming lazily through the windows and the familiar scent of salt and coffee, transformed into the first scene of a story I knew would challenge every measure of my character, every ounce of my patience, and ultimately define the path of justice, love, and retribution in our family. Lily placed the envelope on my lap with a trembling hand, her small fingers curling protectively around its edges as if the paper itself could carry the weight of the secret she had stumbled upon, and I felt a knot form in my stomach, a mixture of dread and anticipation that had nothing to do with the morning sun casting warm light across the living room, nothing to do with the faint creak of the floorboards under her feet, and everything to do with the sudden, silent knowledge that our family's quiet life was about to fracture. So I guided her to sit beside me on the worn leather chair, the one I had inherited from Evelyn, my late wife, feeling the smooth texture of its surface and letting its familiarity anchor me while she whispered, almost inaudibly, "Grandpa, it's from Mommy's office. I found emails, texts, pictures. I don't know what it all means, but I think it's bad." And I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm, to slow the rapid beating of my heart, to not let my mind leap to conclusions before I had seen the evidence. And as I opened the envelope carefully, each item seemed heavier than its physical weight. A printed email from Emma to an old business partner of Daniel's, conversations arranged with precise timing, hints of meetings in hotels and offices I had never known existed, and then photographs, candid, undeniable, showing Emma in moments of intimacy and closeness with a man who was supposed to be merely an associate. The laughter frozen in the images twisted in my gut, and the text threads, printed in neat columns, revealed a meticulous plan, discussions about asset transfers, subtle manipulations of my son, the kind of long-term plotting that spoke of cold calculation rather than fleeting emotion. And as I read line after line, my mind raced back over the past year, connecting dots I had barely noticed, moments where Emma had asked seemingly innocent questions about the house, the trust, my health, Daniel's work schedule, all of it suddenly forming a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight, a web of deceit woven with patience and cunning. And the weight of realization settled on my shoulders with crushing clarity. She had been planning this for at least 12 months, carefully aligning each step to maximize her control, and the mixture of fury, betrayal, and sorrow washed over me in a way that made my hands tremble as I held the evidence. Yet beneath it all was a steady, determined resolve, a mental sharpening as I acknowledged the necessity to act deliberately, to channel every ounce of experience, every lesson learned from decades of building, losing, and protecting. Because this was no longer just about documents or financial security, it was about the integrity of the family, the protection of my son and my granddaughter, and the assertion that some wrongs, when uncovered, must be met with precision and patience. And I felt the fire of purpose ignite within me, even as my chest ached with anger and heartbreak, the quiet knowledge settling that while the betrayal had been long in preparation, my response would be longer, more deliberate, and ultimately unstoppable. And as Lily looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes, the envelope now open between us, I whispered gently, almost as much to myself as to her, "We will understand it all, and we will act, but only when the time is right." And in that moment, the living room, the smell of salt and coffee, the soft morning light, became the staging ground of a calculated reckoning, the first step in a journey that would demand every bit of courage, intelligence, and endurance that I could summon, for I knew that beneath the surface of these papers lay the blueprint of deception, and I was now its only countermeasure. The morning after examining the envelope, I called Olivia Grant, my old lawyer and confidant from years when I was running my construction business, her voice calm and precise on the other end of the line, and I explained everything I had seen, every email, every photograph, every carefully printed text thread, while Lily sat quietly nearby, her small hands folded in her lap. And Olivia immediately understood the gravity, her tone shifting subtly from professional detachment to urgent determination, suggesting we hire someone to document and track every detail. And that was when I contacted Peter, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator, his reputation for precision and discretion preceding him, and within a day he was at the house, reviewing the evidence with meticulous care, taking notes, asking pointed questions about Emma's recent behavior, her work schedule, her patterns of absence, and I listened quietly, internalizing every suggestion, every protocol he outlined. because I knew this was the foundation for the plan that would protect Daniel and Lily, a plan that would require patience, observation, and an almost surgical control of my own emotions. Over the next several weeks, I went about my days pretending to be the same grandfather and husband I had always been, making small talk with Emma over breakfast, nodding politely at Daniel's casual comments about work, smiling at Lily when she showed me a drawing, while all the while my mind cataloged every movement, every interaction, and Peter moved like a shadow in our lives, recording conversations when legal, documenting Emma's movements, photographing meetings with the old business partner, keeping a meticulous file of contracts, photocopies, hotel receipts, and even casual gestures that would otherwise go unnoticed. And each evening, when the house settled into quiet, I would sit in my workshop, the familiar smell of cedar and varnish around me, and review the day's findings with Olivia over the phone, piecing together timelines, connecting dots, planning contingencies, all while maintaining the facade of normalcy that Emma had come to expect. And I could feel the strain of the double life in the tightening of my chest, the tension in my shoulders, the careful control of my expression every time she looked at me with that polished smile, the careful way I met Daniel's gaze without revealing any suspicion, because one false move, one flicker of recognition, and the entire investigation could unravel. And yet in that tension, I found focus, the kind of clarity that only comes when you are faced with a threat to everything you hold dear. And in the quiet moments when Lily fell asleep, I would sit with the envelope open on the table, rereading the evidence, feeling both anger and sorrow, the cold calculation of betrayal mixing with the warm, protective instinct I had nurtured all these years. And I reminded myself over and over that patience would be the most dangerous and effective weapon, that any confrontation too soon would risk Lily's innocence, Daniel's trust, and the ultimate outcome. And so I moved carefully through each day, smiling, laughing, pretending that everything was ordinary, while beneath the surface I became something else, a man transformed by betrayal, a man who could hold rage and sorrow in one hand while orchestrating justice with the other. And every night, as I closed the blinds and listened to the ocean wind rattling the windows, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also the steady, rising flame of determination, knowing that this careful, painstaking preparation was the only way to ensure that when the time came, Emma's duplicity would be revealed in full, Daniel and Lily would be protected, and the family I had fought so hard to preserve would emerge unbroken, and perhaps even stronger, for the subtle, relentless work of a grandfather, a father, a man unwilling to allow deceit to go unchecked in the house he had built, the life he had raised, and the family he would defend at any cost. I watched Emma from across the breakfast table, the morning light streaming through the tall windows highlighting the precise curl of her hair, the polished sheen of her nails, the casual elegance of her movements, and I felt the old, familiar tension knot in my chest, a mixture of fury and the cold, clinical detachment I had cultivated over the past weeks, because every small gesture she made, glancing at her phone under the table, typing with that subtle urgency, smiling too carefully at Daniel when he spoke, shifting her weight slightly as if calculating her next step, told me more than words ever could. The way she lingered on text notifications, her eyes narrowing just enough to betray impatience, the almost imperceptible twitch of her lips when reading a message, the casual references to meetings with a client that I knew had no legitimate context, all of it painted a portrait of ambition and fear intertwined. A woman who had mastered the art of deception, and yet was never fully at ease, the kind of unease that seeps into a household like a slow poison. And I recognized immediately that she was calculating every interaction, balancing charm and subtle coercion, knowing the value of patience as much as the value of the right distraction. And my pulse quickened, but I forced my face into a mask of calm, smiling politely at her comment about Daniel's new project, nodding at Lily as she showed me her drawing, laughing lightly at some trivial joke, all while internally cataloging every movement, every glance, every pause, storing them with the precision of an archivist, because in that data lay the blueprint of her plan, the steps she had taken to position herself for control, and the knowledge that she believed herself untouchable, that she had layered manipulation over months of seemingly mundane conversation, a year-long orchestration hidden in plain sight. And yet I held myself still, forcing my breathing steady, reminding myself that anger, though hot and tempting, would destroy strategy, that any hint of suspicion or rage in my voice could unravel weeks of preparation and risk, not only exposing her prematurely, but endangering Lily's trust and Daniel's emotional equilibrium. So I practiced the art of the ordinary, moving through the day as if nothing were wrong, watching her, noting the subtle patterns of text timing, the frequency of her calls, the careful language she used in passing references, and I felt that combination of pain and resolve, the grief of recognizing betrayal by someone your son loves, mixed with the cold, calculating determination that now defined my every action, and I reminded myself repeatedly that this observation was not passive, that each moment of apparent normalcy was a thread in a tapestry I was weaving, each controlled interaction a safeguard, each restrained sigh or smile a shield, and as I sat there, pretending to admire Lily's artwork while Emma checked her messages with the faintest flicker of anxiety in her eyes, I knew that the plan we were building, legal, tactical, and psychological, would only succeed if I maintained this delicate balance, if I could endure the pretense of family harmony while gathering proof, because revenge, in its sweetest form, is measured, deliberate, and patient, and I felt the simmering fire of purpose settle into the cold steel of resolve, knowing that the day her careful mask slipped, when the facade crumbled under undeniable evidence, would be the moment of justice, not fueled by rash emotion, but by the slow, inevitable consequence of years of deception. And as Emma laughed softly at some trivial remark, not realizing the scrutiny she was under, I took a quiet breath and promised myself that I would not fail Lily, I would not fail Daniel, and I would not fail the life Evelyn and I had built, because sometimes the most dangerous power is restraint, and I had learned to wield it with precision. Daniel's presence in the house had begun to feel slightly different over the past week, a subtle tension in his voice, a pause before answering questions, a fleeting glance toward Emma that lingered a moment too long, and I felt it immediately. The quiet tremor of doubt beneath his otherwise steady demeanor, his love for Emma still evident, unwavering in the eyes that had grown from a boy into the man sitting across from me at the breakfast table, yet now shadowed with questions he did not dare fully voice. And as I poured coffee for him, watching the steam curl upward in the morning light, I noticed the way he hesitated before lifting the cup, as if testing the normalcy of our routine, and I knew that his instincts, though suppressed by affection and loyalty, were beginning to sense the undercurrent of deception I had uncovered. So I smiled softly, keeping my tone light, joking about some trivial news item, while internally cataloging every nuance of his behavior, every inflection in his speech, every half-formed question, aware that a single misstep could alert him prematurely to the truth I was gathering. And I leaned slightly toward Lily as she played quietly at the corner of the room, whispering gently, "Remember, darling, keep calm. Don't say a word about what you know, just act normal." And she nodded, her wide eyes full of trust, and the weight of understanding far beyond her years, the envelope and its secrets resting safely hidden. And as Daniel asked casually about Emma's schedule, about a meeting she had rescheduled, I felt the familiar tension coil in my chest, the combination of anticipation and anger, and I had to control the urge to let slip a flicker of insight, to maintain the facade of ignorance while every fiber of me was analyzing his every reaction, noting the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tilt of his head, the subtle change in his posture when he mentioned the hotel near the city, and I realized that this growing suspicion, this almost imperceptible unease, was both a risk and a tool, because if managed carefully, it could bring him closer to understanding without shattering his trust. And I reminded myself to breathe slowly, to keep my expressions neutral, to allow the ordinary rhythm of our household to continue while the undercurrents of strategy and vigilance remained beneath the surface, observing Emma without revealing awareness, gauging Daniel without alarming him, nurturing Lily's courage without exposing her innocence. And as I listened to his next question, seemingly innocent about Emma's work calls, I felt the full weight of responsibility pressing down, the need to balance patience, observation, and the careful orchestration of events that would ultimately protect the family, because one wrong glance, one careless word, and the careful plan we had been constructing could collapse. Yet, I also felt a surge of resolve, a grim satisfaction in knowing that Daniel's doubts, though nascent and conflicted with his love for Emma, would be guided gently, shielded from immediate pain, while we continued the silent accumulation of evidence and preparation for the inevitable confrontation. And in that quiet, tension-filled morning, the house hummed with a deceptive calm, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of ocean air, and I reminded myself that this delicate balance, the constant vigilance, the measured restraint, was the truest form of control, the only way to ensure that when the truth was finally revealed, Daniel would be prepared, Lily would be safe, and Emma's carefully constructed deception would be met with the full weight of justice, delivered not in anger, but with precision, strategy, and the enduring patience of a father and grandfather who had learned the hard lessons of trust, betrayal, and protection over a lifetime. The days that followed became a blur of meticulous observation and careful collection. Each morning I would sit at my old oak desk in the study, the scent of polished wood, and the faint tang of salt from the ocean breeze wafting through the open windows. And across from me Peter, the former intelligence officer turned investigator, laid out a new set of findings. Photocopies of contracts for property transfers that were falsified, emails and text messages between Emma and her old business associate, subtle agreements that hinted at meetings and transactions Daniel was never made aware of, and photographs that captured moments of interaction which, though seemingly innocuous to the casual eye, bore the unmistakable intimacy and coordination of a plan designed to manipulate and secure advantage. And as I examined each document, my eyes tracing lines of typed words and signatures, I felt the weight of strategy pressing down on me, the cold clarity of planned revenge, the responsibility of ensuring that every piece of evidence was accurate, admissible, undeniable, and perfectly timed. And each day yielded something new: a phone record, a dinner receipt, a handwritten note slipped between papers that revealed a further layer of premeditation. And with every discovery, the pattern of deception unfolded more clearly, a labyrinth of ambition and deceit that had been in motion for over a year. And yet I had to maintain the illusion of normalcy, walking through the kitchen with Daniel, exchanging casual words with Emma, smiling at Lily as she played, all the while compartmentalizing the growing fury in my chest and the sorrow that accompanied the realization that the woman my son trusted so completely had been orchestrating this in secret. And I coached Lily quietly. "Stay calm. Keep playing. Everything is all right." Her small nod and steadying breath, a reminder that our most important work was protection, that innocence must be preserved until the right moment. And I took solace in the rhythm of our careful routine, in the quiet focus of reviewing documents late into the night, cross-referencing dates, locations, and communications, knowing that each verified piece strengthened the foundation upon which justice and family security would rest, feeling simultaneously the sharp sting of betrayal and the intoxicating clarity of power, the knowledge that every action, every observation, every calculated delay brought me closer to a confrontation that would be precise, inevitable, and utterly just. And even as Emma moved through the house with her practiced ease, unaware of the scrutiny she was under, I felt the full measure of responsibility for what lay ahead, the careful orchestration of exposure, and the profound satisfaction that strategy, patience, and meticulous attention to detail were the tools through which I would protect Daniel, shield Lily, and confront the duplicity with a force tempered by time and forethought. And as the sun set behind the distant horizon, painting the study in warm amber light, I reviewed the day's findings once more, my mind alive with connections, possibilities, and the relentless drive to see the plan through, knowing that this was not merely about discovery, but about shaping the moment when truth, undeniable and complete, would finally emerge, and that the careful collection of evidence, the methodical assembly of proof, and the quiet endurance of deception would culminate in a reckoning that was both inevitable and perfectly justified. The day of the meeting arrived like a storm barely contained beneath calm skies, and I moved through the house with deliberate ease, ensuring every detail: the placement of chairs around the polished mahogany dining table, the angle of sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the ocean air, was controlled, while Daniel sat quietly beside me, oblivious to the precise orchestration unfolding, Emma moving about with her usual polished efficiency, unaware that the very room she occupied had been arranged to expose every hesitation, every micro-expression. And I had asked Olivia Grant, my trusted lawyer, to pose as the mediator for the meeting, her presence a careful blend of authority and neutrality, while Peter, unseen, ensured that every phone line, every movement outside, every unexpected arrival was accounted for. And as we began, I observed Emma's posture, noting the subtle shift in her shoulders, the tightness of her smile, the quick flicker of her eyes toward the door, the slight tremor in her hand as she held her coffee, and my pulse tightened, because I knew that every moment stretched between us, each pause, each polite exchange, was a thread in the web I had woven for over a year, and I felt the delicious, patient thrill of anticipation, knowing that she could not yet see the full scope of the trap, that every carefully planted cue, the documents arranged just so, the questions phrased innocuously, the gaze of Daniel fixed on her without accusation, was designed to elicit the reaction that would ultimately betray her, while I maintained the mask of an ordinary father and husband, smiling, nodding, guiding Daniel subtly, whispering to Lily, who sat quietly at the corner, "Remember, sweetie, just be calm, watch and listen." And she obeyed, her eyes wide but steady, as if absorbing every nuance of the moment, and I felt the tension coiling in my chest, the intoxicating blend of fury, sorrow, and strategy as Emma responded to questions about the property, about her work, about her relationships with a business partner, the slightest hesitation, the almost imperceptible flick of her gaze revealing more than she intended, and each second stretched, drawing out the suspense, forcing me to measure my breath, to count my heartbeats, to ensure that nothing in my expression betrayed the knowledge I held. And as Olivia posed a casual question about the next steps in financial planning, Emma's eyes darted subtly to Daniel, seeking reassurance, and I could see the calculation behind the effort to maintain control, the careful mental bookkeeping, the fear underlying her ambition, and I held my silence, savoring the slow build, knowing that the moment of revelation would arrive at precisely the right time, when all preparation, all collected evidence, and every manipulated expectation converged, and I felt the power of restraint, the exquisite patience of watching the architect of betrayal squirm unknowingly. The knowledge that the trap I had constructed over months, with legal precision, investigative diligence, and careful psychological orchestration, was now live, and that within this ordinary-looking meeting room, beneath the polite voices, the careful sipping of coffee, the ordinary facade of family discussion, the stage had been set for Emma to reveal herself fully. And I, Michael Rowan, felt the full weight of my resolve, the responsibility to protect Daniel, to shield Lily, to execute justice with meticulous care, while every second, every gesture, every controlled pause built toward the moment when the carefully measured plan would rip the mask from deception and confront betrayal with its inescapable consequences. And as I observed her, every calculated glance, every micro-expression, I felt the culmination of months of preparation, the full spectrum of human emotion, anger, grief, anticipation, and satisfaction, coalescing into the cold, deliberate clarity of strategy perfected, knowing that the truth, undeniable and complete, would soon emerge in full view, and that the outcome would be both inevitable and impeccably just. The room was charged with a quiet tension, the late afternoon sun spilling through the tall windows onto the polished wooden floors, casting long shadows across the dining table where Daniel sat beside me, Lily perched quietly in her small chair at the corner, eyes wide, and Emma positioned across from us, her smile still perfectly composed, but I could see the flicker of unease in her eyes, the subtle tension in her posture, the careful way she adjusted her hands on the table as if testing her control over the moment, and I felt the familiar, cold thrill of anticipation settle in my chest as I placed the first stack of documents, meticulously organized by Peter and verified by Olivia Grant, in front of Emma, while keeping my expression neutral, my voice calm, knowing that the full weight of months of planning and investigation rested in these papers. And I watched as she glanced down, pretending casual interest, her eyes flicking quickly to Daniel, trying to gauge his reaction, and I could see the carefully maintained mask of confidence beginning to falter under the subtle, undeniable authority of the evidence before her, the emails, the photographs, the contracts, every layer of deception exposed for the first time in a way that left no ambiguity, and I spoke, my tone measured and quiet, introducing each piece of proof without a hint of accusation, letting the documents themselves do the talking, while Olivia sat slightly behind me, a professional calm in her eyes, and Peter remained just outside the immediate line of sight, ensuring everything was captured and corroborated, and Daniel's eyes widened gradually, then narrowed with a mix of shock and disbelief, the tension visible in his jaw as he struggled between his lingering love for Emma and the stark clarity of betrayal that unfolded in front of him. And I could see her first flicker of panic as she attempted to deny, to explain, to reframe, but the evidence was precise, irrefutable, layered like a trap she had not anticipated, and she hesitated, faltering, before launching into the instinctive strategy of deflection, trying to place blame on Daniel, claiming misunderstandings and misinterpretation. But I remained perfectly still, the calm steel of long patience and careful orchestration radiating through every inch of my posture, my eyes never leaving hers, and Lily's small gaze, bright and alert, felt like the moral center of the room, a silent witness to the unraveling of the carefully constructed facade, and I could feel the moment stretching, the suspense building with every second that passed, each breath, each glance, each micro-expression weighed, measured, controlled, until Emma's defenses crumbled under the precision and inevitability of truth, her carefully crafted story collapsing as one by one the documents and corroborated notes aligned to reveal her intentions. And Daniel's shoulders slumped with grief and anger, a low, controlled fury in his chest, his hands tightening slightly on the edge of the table as he absorbed the full scope of betrayal, and I felt the satisfaction of justice tempered by restraint, the sweet, deliberate vengeance of a plan executed with patience and precision, while Emma's face went pale, her eyes darting, searching for an ally that did not exist, and the subtle shift in the room's energy, the palpable release of tension as denial failed, as accusations fell away under undeniable truth, solidified the moment. And I saw her lips part, trying once more to manipulate, to assign blame elsewhere. But it was too late. The timeline, the evidence, the strategic positioning of every participant, all orchestrated with care, left no room for escape. And as she realized that Daniel could no longer shield her with love, that Peter's collected evidence and Olivia's legal precision had cornered her completely, I felt the culmination of months of careful, silent labor, the perfect alignment of strategy, patience, and moral imperative. And as Lily's eyes met mine, bright, brave, unflinching, I understood that the moment had not only exposed betrayal, but reaffirmed the family's bonds, the protective instinct of a grandfather, the measured coldness of a man who had endured grief, and the quiet, inescapable satisfaction of watching truth claim its due, leaving Emma defeated, Daniel heartbroken, but clear-eyed, and the stage set for justice to follow its inevitable course. The days after the confrontation unfolded with a tense, surreal precision as Emma, stripped of the carefully constructed illusion of control, was required to leave the family home, her rights curtailed to the minimum stipulated by the prenup, and the once polished confidence in her eyes now clouded with frustration, anger, and disbelief as she packed her belongings, moving through the rooms that had once been hers with the quiet inevitability of someone who had been unmasked, while Daniel, sitting at the kitchen table with Lily beside him, finally allowed himself to breathe, to fully recognize the depth of betrayal he had been blind to, his jaw tight, his fists clenched, yet his heart resolute in the protective instinct he felt for his daughter, and for the integrity of the life Evelyn and I had worked to build. And Peter's reports arrived with relentless clarity, every detail of the business associates' involvement laid bare, the illegitimate meetings, the contracts signed without authorization, the layers of deception meticulously documented and now being addressed by legal authorities. And I watched Daniel as he read through the reports, the first flush of shock giving way to controlled fury, a new determination solidifying in his eyes as he realized the full scale of what had been at stake, while Lily, small yet luminous, had become the silent hero of these events, her intuition, courage, and willingness to act having catalyzed the unraveling of a year-long scheme. And I felt a profound, almost reverent pride in her, knowing that her awareness and bravery had altered the trajectory of our family, the weight of responsibility she carried at 8 years old now acknowledged and honored. And as the house settled into a quiet rhythm, with the ocean breeze drifting through the open windows and the scent of salt mingling with the lingering warmth of late afternoon sun, I reflected on the cold satisfaction of justice executed with precision, the slow, deliberate planning paying off as Daniel assumed full control over the family assets, restructuring trusts and accounts to ensure that Lily's future was protected. And I felt the delicate balance of emotion and strategy coalescing into the calm aftermath. A careful equilibrium where anger had served its purpose, sorrow had passed its measure, and the family was safe, whole, and aware, finally, of both the fragility and resilience of trust. And as I sat back in my chair, the familiar grain of the oak under my fingers, observing Daniel braid Lily's hair, fumbling yet patient, and hearing her small laughter echoing through the rooms, I realized that justice had been served, not with explosive fury, but with measured, deliberate action, guided by observation, evidence, and the unerring judgment that comes with age, experience, and a willingness to endure the tension of ordinary days while preparing for extraordinary truth. And I knew that this moment, this restored harmony and recognition of courage and insight, would remain etched in our lives. The sound of Lily's laughter a reminder of the power of innocence, observation, and steadfast resolve, and I understood, more fully than ever, that protecting family, executing justice, and honoring the truth was a discipline of patience, endurance, and the quiet, inescapable satisfaction of seeing deception meet its due. The house was quiet that evening, the ocean wind rustling the curtains as I sat at my desk, the familiar grain of the wood under my fingers, reviewing the final documents that would cement Lily's future in a trust I had structured to protect her until her 25th birthday. Every clause meticulously drafted to ensure that her inheritance, her security, and the life she deserved were safeguarded against the unpredictability of human ambition. And Daniel sat nearby, absorbed in organizing the household accounts, setting new routines for managing the property, the family business, and the delicate social ties that had been strained by recent revelations. And I watched him carefully, noting the lines of responsibility etched into his face, the quiet determination that had grown from grief and shock into a steady, deliberate focus on protecting our family, and I felt a profound satisfaction knowing that the next generation would be prepared, that Lily's courage and intuition, her observant eyes and steady heart, had not only revealed deception but had become the cornerstone of our restored security. And as she played quietly in the corner, arranging her dolls with the meticulous care she had always displayed, I saw the spark of intelligence and bravery that would continue to guide her, the reminder that insight and courage can arrive in the smallest forms, and I reflected on the lessons learned. Justice is not the fire of rage, it is the careful calibration of patience, the orchestration of evidence, the quiet endurance through ordinary days while preparing for extraordinary truth, and I reminded myself repeatedly that strategy, not impulsivity, had preserved our family, that restraint had been the most powerful weapon, and that vigilance and observation, combined with measured action, could protect those we love from the shadows of ambition and deceit. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting amber and violet hues across the walls, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight lift slightly from my shoulders, to hear Lily's soft laughter as Daniel tried and failed to braid her hair properly, a sound that echoed through the rooms and warmed my heart with the knowledge of resilience and restored trust. And yet, as I looked at the photographs on the mantel, at the evidence carefully stored in locked files, and at the calm of the evening, I knew the world outside our walls remained unpredictable, that deception can emerge where least expected, and that our vigilance must never waver. And I whispered to myself with a quiet, deliberate certainty, justice is not about fury, it is about strategy and patience. Feeling the truth of that statement resonate deep within me, while the light faded and shadows stretched across the house, leaving a subtle, lingering tension, the awareness that though this chapter had ended, the careful balance of observation, courage, and protective action would continue, that Lily, Daniel, and I were stronger for what had passed, and that somewhere, perhaps, another test, another deception, might be quietly forming, waiting to meet the resolve of those who watch, who act, and who endure.